The day started like any other. Across Earth's vast cities, people went about their routines, unaware that the most significant battle in human history was about to begin. The skies were blue, the oceans calm. But beyond the exosphere, where the darkness of space stretched infinitely, an armada of unprecedented size emerged from the void. The Galactic Dominion, an empire so vast and ancient that its origins were lost to time, had arrived with one singular purpose: to erase humanity from existence. Their fleet was the stuff of nightmares. 30 dreadnought-class warships, each the size of a small moon, bristling with planet-cracking weaponry and shielded by energy barriers that could withstand the detonation of entire stars. Hundreds of escort cruisers flanked them, their sleek, dark hulls absorbing the distant glow of Sol. Squadrons of drone fighters, programmed for relentless efficiency, swarmed between the warships like mechanical locusts. And at the center of it all was the Dominion's flagship, an abyssal fortress of metal and destruction, its very presence an omen of annihilation. To the Dominion, Earth was nothing more than another nameless world in their long history of conquest. It wasn't the first time they had reduced a planet to rubble, nor would it be the last. They had spent centuries expanding their empire, absorbing or obliterating species they deemed unworthy. The Dominion was not merely a galactic power, it was the galactic power, unmatched in warfare, technology, and sheer military might. They had never lost a war, not once. And yet, in the span of a single day, that would change forever. To understand the events that followed, we must first understand the enemy. The Galactic Dominion ruled over thousands of star systems, spanning the galactic core and beyond. Their empire was built on conquest, crushing civilizations that dared to resist and assimilating those that submitted. To them, war was a science. It was calculated, precise, and absolute. Their fleets were commanded by advanced AI, capable of processing battlefield data faster than any organic mind. Their weapons could incinerate entire fleets in a single barrage. Their soldiers, genetically engineered warriors, bred for battle, had never known defeat. When the Dominion first became aware of humanity, they didn't see a threat. Earth was a young civilization, barely stepping beyond its home system. Its colonies were few, its fleets limited, its technology primitive. Humanity was aggressive, yes, but aggression was meaningless without power to back it up. And compared to the Dominion, humanity was insignificant. The Dominion's high command debated whether Earth was even worth an invasion. Some argued that humanity could be useful as a vassal species, producing resources for the Empire. Others, however, saw the writings on the wall: humanity's rapid technological progress, their unpredictability, their resistance to submission. The Dominion had encountered species like this before, and every time, those species had eventually risen up. A decision was made. The Dominion would not allow humanity to become a future problem. Earth was to be annihilated. The attack was meant to be swift and absolute. The Dominion fleet arrived in the Sol system under full cloak, their presence undetectable to human sensors. Their strategy was simple: break Earth's orbital defenses, bombard the planet from orbit, and deploy ground forces to exterminate whatever remained. It was a tactic they had perfected over millennia, and it had never failed. They had no reason to believe it would fail now. As the fleet entered high orbit, their scanners analyzed Earth's defenses. The Dominion's admirals were unimpressed. Humanity's orbital weapons were outdated by Dominion standards. Their ships, while fast and maneuverable, were fragile. Their planetary shields, while present, were nowhere near strong enough to withstand sustained bombardment. Everything pointed to an easy victory. And then, something strange happened. Normally, when a planet was targeted for annihilation, there would be panic, distress signals, desperate pleas for mercy, civilian ships attempting to flee. But Earth? Earth was silent. No transmissions, no surrender. Just silence. At first, the Dominion assumed it was a glitch in their communication system. But then, their sensors detected something else: human ships lying in wait, not retreating, not fleeing, but waiting. And then, all hell broke loose. The silence was unsettling. It was unnatural. The Dominion had conquered thousands of worlds, and never, not once, had a planet reacted this way. Usually there were panicked transmissions, frantic escape attempts, desperate last stands from doomed defenders. But Earth? Earth did nothing. The Dominion's High Admiral, a centuries-old strategist named Vortha Ka, had expected a swift and unchallenged assault. Instead, he was met with a battlefield that felt wrong. His AI battle network quickly scanned for anomalies. The planet's surface showed no signs of civilian evacuation, no emergency broadcasts, no distress calls. If anything, the humans were going about their daily lives, seemingly unaware of the armada looming above them. But that was impossible. Dominion ships were massive. Their mere presence should have triggered widespread panic. And yet, Earth remained eerily calm. Then the Dominion's sensors detected something else. Human warships, hundreds of them, lay in wait across Earth's orbit and beyond. At first glance, they seemed unimpressive. Compared to the Dominion's fleet, they were smaller, lighter, and lacked the intimidating bulk of traditional warships. Their hulls were reinforced with materials that Dominion analysts considered outdated. Their weapons, railguns, kinetic artillery, directed energy cannons, were primitive by Dominion standards. But something didn't add up. These ships weren't positioned defensively. They weren't clustered around Earth's orbital stations in a desperate attempt to hold the line. Instead, they were waiting, like hunters in the dark. Vortha Ka scoffed. "Fools," he muttered. A predictable last stand, an attempt to inspire resistance through a noble but futile sacrifice. He had seen it before. He gave the order. The Dominion fleet would commence their planetary assault. The dreadnoughts took position, their colossal siege cannons primed to unleash devastation. Then they fired. And in that instant, everything changed. The first sign that something was wrong came from the Dominion's targeting systems. As the dreadnoughts' cannons unleashed their fury, their targeting reticles flickered. Just for a fraction of a second. It was barely noticeable, a minor anomaly. But then, as the energy pulses hurtled toward Earth's surface, they vanished. Not intercepted, not deflected, simply gone. The Dominion's admirals were stunned. Their weapons had never failed before. These were cannons capable of reducing entire cities to vapor, of shattering continents. And yet, the moment they entered Earth's atmosphere, they ceased to exist. It was as if space itself had swallowed them whole. The Dominion's fleet AI instantly reanalyzed the situation. The logical conclusion was jamming technology. Perhaps humanity had developed energy-dampening fields. But that shouldn't have been possible. Such technology required an astronomical energy output. Yet, here they were, watching their deadliest weapons blink out of existence. Then, the real nightmare began. Across the fleet, Dominion ships began losing control of their own systems. One by one, their targeting networks failed, their communication arrays went dark, and their artificial intelligence, once the most advanced in the galaxy, began to break down. A Dominion cruiser, the Varkon's Fist, reported critical system failures before it suddenly turned its weapons on the fleet's own escort vessels, firing without warning. Seconds later, it self-destructed. Panic spread through the armada, as ship after ship experienced catastrophic malfunctions. Engines stalled, shields dropped, weapons misfired. The Dominion's military doctrine relied on efficiency, cold calculation, and technological superiority. But now, none of that mattered. Their ships were failing, their AI was shutting down, and the enemy had yet to fire a single shot. Admiral Vortha Ka's voice boomed across the fleet. "Regain control, switch to manual operations, find out what is happening." And then, the human fleet attacked. It was surgical, precise, ruthless. Human warships emerged from the shadows, moving with a coordination that defied expectation. They struck at the Dominion's weak points with terrifying accuracy. They didn't fight. Like a desperate species clinging to survival, they fought like apex predators dismantling their prey. Railguns, once dismissed as outdated, punched through Dominion armor as if it were paper. Electromagnetic pulses disabled entire squadrons of drones in seconds. Swarms of hypersonic missiles maneuvered with inhuman precision, striking vulnerable joints in the Dominion's capital ships. But it wasn't just their weapons. It was their tactics. The humans didn't follow standard fleet engagement protocols. They didn't line up for massive fleet battles. They disrupted Dominion formations, isolated ships, and executed them one by one. They used electronic warfare in ways the Dominion had never encountered, hijacking enemy sensors, feeding them false data, turning their own ships against them. The Dominion's fleet was in disarray. Their technological advantage meant nothing when they couldn't even use it. The AI-controlled war machines they had relied on for centuries were now liabilities. And worst of all, humanity was not afraid. They were calm, methodical, and absolutely merciless. Admiral Vortha stared at the battlefield in disbelief. This was impossible. His armada had never been defeated. They were the greatest fleet in the galaxy. They had crushed civilizations far more advanced than Earth. And yet, here they were, being torn apart by a species that had barely begun its interstellar journey. And then, the final revelation hit him like a death sentence. Humanity had known. They had known the Dominion was coming. They had been waiting. This wasn't a desperate defense. This was a trap, and the Dominion had walked right into it. Admiral Vortha's mind raced, searching for explanations, contingencies, anything that could turn the tide of battle. But the more he analyzed the situation, the grimmer the reality became. This was not an ordinary war. It was not a battle of attrition, nor was it a contest of brute strength. Humanity had crafted something far more insidious, an entire battlefield where the Dominion's greatest strength, its overwhelming technological superiority, had been turned into its greatest weakness. Desperate to regain control, Vortha activated the Dominion's emergency countermeasures, high-priority AI protocols designed to override any technological interference. Yet, the moment he did, the ship's systems flickered in protest, as though someone, had already infiltrated them. Lines of alien code began scrolling across his personal data feed, overriding commands before they could be executed. That was when he saw it. A message. Simple. Mocking. Welcome to Earth's domain. Vortha felt something unfamiliar clawing at the edges of his consciousness. Fear. It wasn't just that humanity was resisting. It was that they had anticipated every move. The Dominion's technology, so far beyond anything seen in the known galaxy, was being dismantled like a machine in the hands of master engineers. That was when the real horror set in. From the depths of the void, another wave of human warships emerged. Not from Earth, not from its moon or space stations, but from the darkness beyond. They had been hiding in deep space, beyond sensor range, their hulls coated in advanced stealth materials that rendered them functionally invisible. They had waited, patiently, for the Dominion to fully commit to the invasion. And now, the trap was springing shut. The Dominion's rear guard, once thought untouchable, was suddenly beset by a second human fleet. Their formation shattered, their escape routes compromised, their supply lines severed. Vortha realized in that moment that the battle had never truly begun, because humanity had already won before the first shot was even fired. The incoming warships bore insignias that were unlike anything the Dominion had seen before. Some carried symbols resembling ancient human military divisions. An eagle grasping a globe and anchor, a stylized trident, a black dagger against a field of stars. Others displayed ominous markings, simple phrases written in an alien script that Dominion translators struggled to decipher. But one message, above all, was clear. You should have stayed away. The Dominion's tactical AI was deteriorating by the second, unable to process the sheer scope of the disaster unfolding before it. Dominion warships, once thought invincible, were being hunted. Every countermeasure they deployed was met with a devastating response. Their ships were methodically dismantled, their command structures collapsing in real time. And then the Dominion's flagship, the Gorash Khan, received a direct transmission. Unlike previous signals, which had been distorted or overridden, this one was crystal clear. A human face appeared on the main bridge display. Their uniform was stark, decorated with insignias that meant nothing to the Dominion, but carried an undeniable air of authority. Their eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Vortha. When they spoke, their voice was calm, but filled with something even more terrifying than rage. You thought Earth was defenseless. That was your first mistake. You thought you could overwhelm us with numbers. That was your second. And now, you'll learn what happens when you underestimate humanity. Vorthika bared his fangs in defiance. Your planet is a backwater. Your technology is primitive. Your species is insignificant. We are the Dominion. We have ruled for millennia. You are nothing. The human merely tilted their head, unfazed. Then, with deliberate precision, they uttered 4 words that would haunt the Dominion for the rest of its existence. We were never unprepared. And with that, the screen went dark. A new wave of human warships, far larger and more formidable than the first, surged forward. These were not mere defense fleets. They were warships built for conquest. Ships that should not have existed in a species so young. And yet, here they were, bristling with weapons that the Dominion had no counter for. Then, the final stage of the battle began. The humans activated something the Dominion had never seen before. A planetary defense network unlike anything recorded in the known. Galaxy-satellite-based railguns, invisible orbital defense stations, and weapons integrated into Earth's very infrastructure came to life. The planet's surface lit up with flashes of energy, as weapons that had been hidden for decades revealed themselves in full force. Mass drivers, capable of hurling tungsten rods at speeds faster than any known missile, streaked through the void. The Dominion's dreadnoughts, once thought untouchable, were torn apart in seconds. Kinetic impactors, launched from hidden silos deep within Earth's crust, shredded enemy warships before they even knew they were under attack. But the most terrifying revelation came when Dominion sensors detected something far more insidious. It wasn't just Earth's military that had mobilized, it was the entire planet. Civilian ships, supposedly unarmed, began swarming Dominion vessels, disabling them with electromagnetic pulses and boarding operations. Private security firms, independent defense contractors, even civilians armed with improvised weaponry, all of them fought with a coordinated precision that defied logic. Humanity wasn't just defending itself, it was retaliating. The Dominion's chain of command collapsed. Admiral Vorthika watched in horror as his once invincible fleet was reduced to burning wreckage. Desperate, he issued the one order he had never thought he would need: retreat. But there was nowhere to run. Humanity had anticipated everything. Their warships had already cut off all escape routes. Their jamming systems had disabled long-range communications. Their electronic warfare had crippled the Dominion's ability to even coordinate a retreat. And then, in the span of mere minutes, the once great Dominion fleet ceased to exist. Vorthika's personal escape vessel was one of the last remaining ships still operational. As he stared at the burning remnants of his fleet, he realized, too late, that this battle was not just a defeat. It was a message. Earth had not just defended itself. It had demonstrated its power, and the galaxy had just been given a warning. The remnants of the Dominion fleet drifted through space like shattered bones of a long-dead beast. The once mighty armada, built over centuries to be the unchallenged hammer of the galaxy, had been reduced to smoldering debris in mere hours. Fires raged within ruptured hulls, atmosphere venting into the void as the final Dominion warships sputtered in desperation. They were not retreating in an orderly fashion. They were fleeing in sheer terror, abandoning their crippled comrades to the merciless battlefield. Admiral Vorthika's personal escape vessel weaved through the wreckage, dodging burning husks of his former warships. His breathing was shallow, his hands trembling, his mind still struggling to process what had happened. It wasn't simply the defeat that haunted him. It was the sheer efficiency of it. This wasn't a battlefield where the Dominion had suffered heavy losses but fought valiantly. No. This was a graveyard where the Dominion had been butchered, but there was no time to reflect, no time to mourn. He needed to escape. "Status report," he barked at his bridge crew. A nervous officer, his scales darkened with panic, turned toward him. "Supreme Admiral, our long-range communications are still down. We cannot call for reinforcements." Vorthika clenched his mandibles. He had always prided himself on his tactical brilliance, but nothing in his centuries of conquest had prepared him for this. He had underestimated humanity, and now his name would be remembered not as a conqueror, but as the fool who led the Dominion's greatest fleet into an unthinkable disaster. Another officer turned, her voice barely steady. "Admiral, I don't understand how, but they're tracking us." "What?" Vorthaka snapped. "Human warships. They're following us, but they're not firing. They're letting us run." Vorthaka's blood ran cold. No enemy, no matter how ruthless, would allow their foes to escape, unless it wasn't an escape. Unless it was a hunt. Before he could respond, his ship's sensors flared with new warnings. The ship's AI screeched as unknown signals flooded their systems. Human vessels, sleek and predatory, suddenly decloaked in front of the escape fleet. They had been there the entire time, waiting in the darkness, moving like ghosts through the void. And then, a new transmission came through. No distortion, no interference, perfectly clear. A woman's voice, cold and methodical, echoed through the Dominion flagship. "You thought we were letting you go?" Silence fell across the bridge. Vorthaka stood frozen, his claws gripping the console. "Identify yourself," the woman chuckled, a sound far more terrifying than a battle cry. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you understand the situation you're in." A pause. Then, her tone shifted, dark amusement lacing her. "Words. You came here thinking Earth was just another weak world waiting to be conquered, that our weapons were outdated, that our defenses were a formality, that our fleet would crumble before your might. But you never stopped to ask the most important question of all. Why hasn't anyone conquered Earth before you?" Vorthaka's throat tightened. He had always assumed it was because humanity was insignificant, that no one had bothered, because the species had no strategic value. But he was beginning to realize the real reason. No one had conquered Earth. Because no one had survived trying. The woman continued, her voice unwavering. "We didn't just repel your invasion, Admiral. We dismantled it. Every battle plan you had, every strategy, every tactic, it all fell apart the moment you stepped into our system. We knew you were coming. We prepared for this years ago. And now, your fleet is nothing but scrap metal drifting in orbit." The A transmission switched to a live battlefield feed. The image of Earth filled the screen. Dominion wreckage littered the upper atmosphere, entire battleships reduced to tumbling fragments. The last few struggling Dominion vessels were being boarded, their crews dragged from their command centers, forced to surrender to humans. Then, the screen shifted. A single Dominion warship, still functional, was being pulled toward Earth's surface, intact. Vorthaka's eyes widened in horror. "What are you doing?" "We need something to send back to your Dominion," the woman said. A reminder, a warning. The transmission cut off. Moments later, the captured Dominion warship entered Earth's atmosphere, descending toward one of the planet's largest cities. But it wasn't being guided by its own crew anymore. It was controlled by humans, and in every Dominion outpost across the galaxy, the message was clear. Earth was not a world to be conquered. Earth was a world that conquered you. The command deck of Vorthaka's vessel was eerily silent. No one spoke. No one moved. The transmission had ended, but the weight of the human's words lingered like a specter, wrapping its cold fingers around the hearts of every Dominion officer on board. The sheer confidence in that voice had unsettled him more than the destruction of his fleet. Humans did not speak like prey begging for mercy. They spoke like hunters who had already decided the fate of their kill. Vorthaka had led countless campaigns. He had crushed civilizations that had existed for millennia, torn apart empires that had once believed themselves eternal. Yet, in all his years of war, he had never encountered an enemy like this. Because the humans had not just defeated him. They had planned for this moment. Their strategies weren't reactions to an unexpected invasion. No. They had prepared for this long before the first Dominion warship had even entered their system. They had anticipated every move. And they had waited, letting the Dominion bring its mightiest fleet directly into the trap. He turned sharply to his officers. "Find me a way out of this system, now." A younger officer swallowed hard, his hands trembling as they moved over the control panels. "Sir, the humans have established a blockade around the remaining ships. They're jamming our hyperdrive coordinates." Vorthaka's mandibles clenched. The humans weren't just preventing their escape. They were studying them. examining every desperate attempt to flee, learning every evasion pattern, blocking every contingency plan before he could even give the order. Another officer, her voice barely above a whisper, added, "Sir, we're detecting more human vessels on approach. But these aren't warships." Vorthaka's eyes narrowed. "Then what are they?" The officer hesitated before answering. "Civilian ships." The words didn't make sense. Impossible. They wouldn't send civilians to a war zone. But then, the tactical screens flickered to life, displaying the incoming fleet. Dozens of massive, unarmed ships, moving toward the Dominion wreckage. Not to attack, but to retrieve. And then, Vorthaka understood. The humans were not just collecting their own casualties. They were collecting Dominion survivors. A sudden, sickening realization crawled through his mind. The humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were gathering intelligence. This wasn't just about wiping out an invading force. It was about learning everything they could about the Dominion. Their ship designs, their weapons, their language, their tactics, their weaknesses. The Dominion hadn't just lost this war. They had handed humanity the keys to their empire. Vorthaka's breathing became shallow. His mind raced. He had to warn the High Council, had to tell them that this was not just another rebellious world resisting subjugation. This was the beginning of something far, far worse. But before he could act, the ship's alarms shrieked. New contacts. Human. Warships. Larger than the ones that had already decimated his fleet. And they weren't alone. From the far edges of the system, emerging from hidden locations like predators rising from the deep, more ships decloaked. Massive orbital platforms activated, their gun batteries aligning with lethal precision. A deep horror settled into Vorthaka's chest. This wasn't Earth's full military strength. What he had faced before was merely the first line of defense. What he was seeing now was the real fleet. A new transmission cut through the ship's comms. The same woman's voice returned, colder than before. "You have two choices, Admiral." The ship's screens flickered, showing live footage from one of the Dominion's captured warships. Inside, Dominion officers were shackled, lined up in a row. But they were not being tortured. They were being questioned, not with violence, but with terrifying patience. Humans were interrogating them, systematically, thoroughly, extracting everything. The woman continued, "You can surrender, and we will take what we need from you in time." The footage changed. It now showed a Dominion battleship attempting to escape the battlefield. A sudden flash erupted as a human warship fired what appeared to be a single projectile. The Dominion ship didn't just explode. It was ripped apart from the inside out, its hull fragmenting as if reality itself had been unmade. Or, you can try to run, and we erase your existence. Vorthaka knew he had no real choice, but his mind was already beyond the battlefield, beyond his own survival. If the Dominion did not act quickly, if they did not eliminate humanity before this knowledge spread, then, in a matter of years, maybe even months, Earth would not be a single planet resisting conquest. It would become the most powerful force the galaxy had ever seen. And then, the Dominion wouldn't just be fighting a war. They would be fighting for their very survival. Vorthaka's mind raced. Surrender meant imprisonment, interrogation, and the loss of untold strategic secrets. But attempting to escape was a death sentence. There was no question about it now. Humanity had evolved beyond mere survival. They had transformed into a species capable of total annihilation. But something even more disturbing gnawed at him. The humans had planned for this war before it had even begun. Every tactical maneuver, every defensive measure, every counterattack. Everything had been calculated with terrifying precision. The Dominion had walked into a war they had assumed was one-sided. They had arrived expecting to overwhelm a primitive world with brute force. Instead, they had found themselves being studied, broken down, and dismantled. The humans were not just defending themselves. They were learning how to win the next war. The realization sent a ripple of unease through his officers. He could see it in their body language. The shifting mandibles, the uneasy glances, the twitching appendages. The great Dominion fleet, once feared across the stars, had been reduced to prey. A desperate thought formed in Vorthaka's mind. If he could just warn the High Council. If the Dominion could rally the rest of its forces before humanity turned their gaze outward, maybe they still had a chance. But deep inside, he knew it was already too late. His thoughts were interrupted by a series of low beeps. The main display flickered, showing the human fleet repositioning, adjusting their formation with machine-like efficiency. But what drew his attention wasn't their movement. It was the new energy signatures. Dozens of readings flared to life, across the battlefield. These weren't conventional weapons. They weren't missile salvos or railgun barrages. They were something else. A Dominion science officer's mandibles clicked in alarm.
Sir, these energy signatures, they don't match any known human technology. The ship lurched. Not from an impact, not from an external force, but from within. Vorthaka felt the shift in his bones. Something fundamental had changed.
The ship's artificial gravity flickered. Energy readings spiked in erratic, unnatural patterns. Then, the stars outside the viewport bent. Not a simple distortion. Not an illusion. Space itself was twisting, warping as if reality had become fluid. The science officer's voice was barely a whisper. They're using localized gravitational manipulation. But this shouldn't be possible. They're rewriting physics itself. And then, Vorthaka understood. This was not human technology. Not entirely. This was something new. Something that had been developed from reverse engineering Dominion advancements. They hadn't just beaten the Dominion's fleet. They had stolen its future. And now, they were demonstrating exactly what that stolen future looked like. The Dominion ships around them began to crumple. Not from explosions. Not from external fire. They were collapsing in on themselves, their hulls folding inward, as if reality had simply decided they should no longer exist. Vorthaka had witnessed the destruction of planets, the extinction of entire civilizations. He had seen weapons that turned stars into unstable novas, reducing entire solar systems to dust. But he had never seen a species redefine the laws of war. The human transmission returned, the same woman's voice, calm and collected, as if reading from a script. You assumed we were weak because we didn't expand like the Dominion. You thought we were unworthy of respect because we hadn't built a vast empire. But we watched.
You're kind. We studied you. And now you will learn the greatest mistake of all. There was a pause. Then, her next words carried the weight of an executioner's sentence. You thought we were playing by your rules.
The Dominion fleet had never stood a chance. This wasn't a battle. This was a statement. One by one, the remaining Dominion warships began to fall. Not through conventional combat, but through a method that no one in the fleet truly understood. Localized, gravity distortions, temporal fractures, quantum destabilization. Words that Vorthaka had never heard used in warfare before. The humans were no longer simply soldiers. They were something else, and the Dominion had handed them the tools to evolve. Deep silence settled over the bridge. The few remaining officers awaited orders, but there was nothing left to command. The Dominion fleet had been reduced to drifting wreckage, and the humans were already moving forward, sweeping the battlefield with eerie precision. Then, a final message appeared on the ship's main display. It was not a demand for surrender. It was not a call for negotiation. It was a single, chilling warning. Leave. Never return. For the first time in his long, brutal career, Vorthaka obeyed. As his remaining ships powered down weapons and prepared for the long journey back to Dominion, space, a terrible thought gnawed at him. This war was never about Earth's survival. It was about something far bigger. Humanity had just proven that they were not a civilization to be conquered. They were a force that could no longer be contained. And, the worst part, they had only just begun. The silence in the Dominion capital was deafening. Vorthaka stood before the High Council, his body rigid, his mandibles tightly pressed together in barely contained frustration. His report was not just a recounting of a military failure. It was a warning, a desperate plea for action before it was too late. The council chamber, usually filled with the hum of deliberation, was deathly still. The assembled warlords and strategists, the architects of the Dominion's military doctrine, sat in stunned disbelief. Some flicked their eyes toward the data recordings, warped footage of ships folding in on themselves, space itself bending around human weapons that should not exist. Others simply stared at Vorthaka, as if hoping he would suddenly announce that this was some kind of elaborate deception. But there was no deception. The Dominion's mightiest fleet had been annihilated. We underestimated them. Vorthaka's voice was low, measured. The weight of what he had seen made every word feel like a death knell. We believed Earth to be a backward world. We believed humanity to be weak. We assumed that our superiority was unquestioned. His eyes swept the chamber. We were wrong. A low murmur rippled through the assembled leaders. Some still clung to denial, their pride refusing to accept the truth. "This is absurd," one warlord scoffed, his armored exoskeleton clicking as he shifted. "Humans should not be capable of this level of warfare. If what you claim is true, then they have surpassed even our most advanced scientific understanding. That is impossible." Vorthaka's mandibles clicked in frustration. And yet, they have done it. He gestured toward the display behind him. "Look at the wreckage. Look at the gravitational distortions, the molecular instability in our destroyed ships. This is not conventional warfare. This is something new." One of the senior counselors, an elder whose carapace bore the scars of countless battles, leaned forward. "Do you believe they will come for us?" The question sent a shiver down Vorthaka's spine. Would they? He thought back to the final, human transmission. Leave. Never return. The humans could have pursued the surviving Dominion ships, wiping them from existence. They could have launched a counteroffensive, taking the fight directly to Dominion space while their forces were weakened. But they hadn't. They had chosen to let them leave. "No," Vorthaka said after a long pause. "Not yet." The elder, counselor's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Vorthaka took a slow breath. "Humanity does not seek conquest in the way we do. They do not expand for the sake of expansion. They do not claim dominion over worlds as we have. That was our mistake. We assumed that because they had not built a sprawling empire, they lacked the ambition or the means to do so." He turned to face the chamber fully. "But they are not like us. They waited. They prepared. They adapted. And now, they have stepped onto the battlefield with weapons and tactics beyond our understanding." His next words were slow, deliberate. "If we leave them alone, they may not pursue war against us." He let that thought linger. Then, his voice turned grim. "But if we attack them again, if we force their hand, then the Dominion will cease to exist." A cold silence settled over the chamber. The implications were clear. The Dominion was at a crossroads. They could continue the war and risk complete annihilation, or they could do something unthinkable: retreat. One of the warlords, a veteran of countless conquests, snarled, "We do not cower. We do not surrender." His voice was filled with barely contained rage. "If what you say is true, then the only logical response is to mobilize our full strength. We cannot allow a threat like this to remain unchecked. We must strike before they have time to—" A new voice cut through the chamber. A deep, rumbling tone that carried the weight of absolute authority. "No." Every leader turned toward the massive figure at the head of the chamber. The High Dominator, supreme ruler of the Dominion, slowly stood. His golden exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's dim light, his four eyes cold and unreadable. "No more war," he repeated. The warlord who had spoken recoiled slightly, shocked by the words. "My lord, you can't possibly mean to—" "I do." The High Dominator's voice was calm. "Absolute. The war is over." For a long moment, the chamber was silent. Then, one by one, the counselors lowered their heads in reluctant acceptance. The Dominion had ruled through conquest for millennia. They had never encountered an enemy they could not eventually break, an empire they could not eventually outlast. But this was different. Humanity was not an empire. Humanity was a storm. A force that had been waiting, growing, adapting. And the Dominion had handed them the very knowledge they needed to become unstoppable. To challenge them again would be suicide. Vortha exhaled slowly. It was over. For the first time in recorded history, the Dominion had been forced to retreat. Not from an empire, not from a superior military force, but from a single world, a world that should have been easy prey, but had instead become the
deadliest opponent the Dominion had ever faced. As the High Council adjourned, Vortha turned his gaze toward the massive star map dominating the chamber's center.
His eyes lingered on the small, unassuming dot labeled Earth. The humans had warned them. Leave, never return. And for once in his life, Vortha intended to obey, because deep in his bones, he knew one thing for certain. The next time humanity went to war, they wouldn't just be defending themselves, they would be conquering.